So let's walk down Myrtle Avenue in about 1950.
Exactly. Well, yes, pretty roughly 1950.
Okay.
So we talked about the businesses on Huntington Drive, and I think maybe with the exception of the two nurseries, Rosedale's and Dygard, they were almost all on a much smaller scale. The major businesses were still on Myrtle Avenue, and Myrtle Avenue is still considered to be the main business district, even though both Foothill and Huntington had their share of businesses. So we're going to start at the corner of Myrtle and Foothill, and then walk south from there. On the southeast corner of Myrtle and Foothill, where the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf is now, was the United States, I can almost talk, United States National Bank of San Diego. This bank started out as a small independent, the Citizens Bank of Monrovia, in 1926, and then about 1930, they put up a 3-story reinforced concrete building on the southeast corner that, interestingly enough, had been owned by one of the founders and directors, Charlie Anson, my shirt-tail relative. So Charlie, I think, owned the corner. I know he owned the corner. I don't know how far east he owned. But anyway, that corner had been his personal residence when he first came to Monrovia in 1901. They developed that corner with a gas station about 1912 that was on the front lawn. And then later on, there was a Buick dealership and a repair shop on the corner. They picked up the house that had been right on the corner, moved it east, and then when the bank went up, it was moved up to 125 North Stedman Place. It's no longer there. Finally, after living in 3 different locations, it was bulldozed. But that house got around. Anyway, U.S. National was Citizens Bank of Monrovia, 3-story building that was there. The bank itself went through several changes of ownership. It became, as I say, United States National Bank. Then it became part of Crocker Citizens Bank, and then it became Wells Fargo Bank. Somewhere in there, I think it might have been with U.S. National, I'm pretty sure, they decided that a 3-story building was no longer practical. So they proceeded to demolish this 3-story building, and I believe the only thing that was intact they left was the bank vault itself. Then they rebuilt a 1-story structure around the bank vault, and that served until Wells Fargo closed down that location, moved into the Vaughn's Pavilions, where they had just a little kind of satellite office. And then they finally reopened again further down the street on Myrtle. But anyway, in 1950, United States National Bank, bank on the ground floor, offices on the 2 upper floors. 104 was J.W. Hudson Insurance. J.W. Hudson was in the insurance building business for many, many years in Monrovia. His grandson serves with me on my sister's Santa Barbara Revels in Santa Barbara. Howard became an accountant, as his father was, and that's where Howard is now. 106, the Knit Shop. Catherine Carlson was the name of the owner. She was the wife of George Carlson, who had the Kellogg Blaine Carlson Insurance Agency a little further down the south at 116. Also on that same side was Ralph's Barber Shop, Ralph Cairns, the beauty shop at 114. I mentioned the insurance agency, the Hostess Candy Shop. These were all the small storefronts north of the entrance to the Eleven Oaks Hotel. All the building is still there, different tenants, but the building itself survives. At 120 was Eleven Oaks Hotel. And then in the small stores south of the Eleven Oaks entry were J.A. Danforth Real Estate, Johnson and Danforth Landscape Company. This was a father-in-law and son-in-law business. Johnson was the son-in-law. J.A. Danforth was the father. Their daughter and granddaughter Judy was my class all the way through Monrovia schools.
Steve, about when was Eleven Oaks built?
Built in 1911. And originally, the hotel grounds were all the way in front. And then at some point in the 20s, they built those storefronts. I think it's 5 storefronts on one side and 4 on the other, or something like that. So they took up most of the storefront, or most of the frontage along Myrtle Avenue, leaving this corridor leading to the front of the hotel. And those are, the ones on the south side have been remodeled heavily. No, sorry, not quite as much. The ones on the north side, quite a bit more. But they all date from about 1928 or 1930. And they're all maybe 15 feet storefronts. They're all small, which would explain like a knit shop, an accounting office, etc. That takes us up to, well, let me talk about the ones south of the entry to 11 Oaks Liquors. I mentioned Danforth, the Ace Flower Shop, and J.W. Harvey Optometrist. John W. Harvey was an optometrist for many, many years later on, further south, next to the Bank of America. And then 130 was an office occupied by 4 different realtors. On the west side of the street, at 111, was a Standard Station gas station, actually it's the southwest corner of Myrtle and Foothill. Silkett Brothers Autos, they had Hudson's, and that building was there until the Pavilions Shopping Center was created.
Didn't they used to be much farther south on Myrtle? We have some pictures of the parades with the Silkett Brothers.
Yeah, they were like in the 700 block. By 1950, they were at this location, but you're right, 700 block earlier on and with earlier pictures. 125, Hinkle's Gift and Bookshop. I don't know much about Hinkle's except the address and what their business was. There was a furniture company next to that, and then the sanitary barber shop, and at 135 was Marjorie's Hairstyling, and at 137, I believe that was right on the corner of Myrtle and Linwood, when Linwood Avenue still came through all the way to Myrtle Avenue before the 100 block of Linwood was abandoned as a street and became part of the shopping center. Claude Chess Radio Store, heavy emphasis on radio. He also later on had TVs, but at this point, TVs were new enough that his main focus was selling radios. And then across the street, still on the 100 block, Merritt's Restaurant. This is a family operation. Leo was the father and the cook. Edna was the mother. And Eleanor was their spinster daughter, who was the waitress, the primary waitress. This is a strictly family operation. I can remember being told that Mr. Merritt was not one to tolerate rambunctious children. He'd been known to come out of the kitchen and show them the door. They finally retired. Edna and Eleanor provided home care for many, many years. And then finally, Eleanor was the last survivor. She died not too many years ago. But it was a great family operation. If they decided to go on vacation, they would call all their regulars to let them know they were going to be closed so they didn't show up and be disappointed because they were on vacation. And they had Harvard beets. Have you ever had Harvard beets?
No.
They were fixed, I think, with cornstarch. Anyway, they had this beets in this rich sauce. Harvard beets, yum yum. Anyway, for many years there was a parishioner here at St. Luke's, Jeannie Stewart. Jeannie had been blind since middle age. She had eye problems as a child, and later on she became almost completely blind. She liked to have people take her out to dinner. And so Merritt's was one of Jeannie's destination, and I took her there many times, and Eleanor would come and wait out. And Jeannie was one of those whom they would call when it was time to go on vacation. They'd say, Mrs. Stewart, yes, we're going to be gone, closed next week. Don't come to eat. At Linwood, again, there was a cleaning at 200. There was a cleaners right across the street. On the southwest corner was Benita Cleaners. And then at 202 was Carrie E. Hardy. Carrie E. Hardy, let's see if I can find him, was the local Chrysler Plymouth dealer. The building is still there, but it's now the Foothill Gym. After Carrie, they did a remodel probably in the 50s. When the building was constructed, It had a Spanish colonial revival facade. It had two large arched windows in front with a central entryway and a little balcony above it. Well, they bulldozed all of that and put on the modern front, the one that's there now, which is primarily plate glass windows. But the rear portion around the corner still has the porte cochere where you would drive in for a service, and that's got the original archway that was left from the original construction. Margaret's Gift Shop, Gerald Curvin, Household Appliances. Gerald Curvin sold Serval refrigerators. Do you know what powered Serval refrigerators? Gas. There were gas refrigerators, and what he had on the front of his building was a blue gas flame that lighted up to advertise the fact that he sold Serval refrigerators. A newsstand, little lock company, and then the CNC barber shop. 220, a building that's still there. All those locations that I mentioned are gone. They were all, the buildings themselves were torn down to make way for the renewal, the Park Plaza project. 220 on the east side of Myrtle still is there. It's been, the front facade's been remodeled, the building itself is there. So we had a chiropodist, a physician, an optometrist, and a dentist. Farmers Insurance Group, and then we had the Palms Motel. Palms was interesting in that it was a large two-story rooming house, essentially, that dated from probably early 1900s, and it was there. I'm trying to think who lived there. Teachers usually, let's say a single teacher with the Monrovia School District, would rent a room there because it was close to, say, Ivy Avenue School, not too far from Linwood School. So a number of teachers had that as an early address.
What's there now?
It was torn down to make way for the Bank of America parking lot on South Myrtle. There were 2 stores, I believe a vacant lot, maybe a personal private residence, and then the Palms and all that, those were leveled to make way for the Bank of America in the 1950s. Across the street was Toy Haven Gifts, great toy store. Trust me on this one. Used to go there, Toy Haven. That was a 2-story building, and there were rented rooms above it. There was also
Rented rooms where someone would live?
Yeah. They would, they'd rent a furnished room, they'd get all their meals on Myrtle Avenue. I doubt there were cooking facilities. And that was, was a pretty typical pattern for singles who didn't want or didn't need a full household, just needed a room to call their own. And then they'd walk to any of the restaurants in Myrtle Avenue for their meals. Turner's Style Shop Women's Clothing at 229 was the Knights of Pythias building. And we had, as tenants, Faith Rose Bowden, dance teacher. There's a great picture in the museum of a Monrovia Day parade, probably in the early, I'd guess 1950s. It's a flatbed truck, and on it are dancing some of Faith Rose Bowden's pupils on this flatbed truck. In the background are the 2 buildings that were there on the east side of Myrtle Avenue before. And I'll get to there. Okay. The other tenants, the Knights of Columbus, rented upstairs in the Knights of Pythias building, the San Gabriel Gun Club. Downstairs, the Monrovia Motor Parts, an insurance agency, and the Young Men's Christian Association. East side of the street, Central Food Market, which was A.L. Funk's, and that was another of those open-air markets where they were closed at night by simply pulling across a folding metal gate and padlocking it, and then opening up the next day by simply putting the gates and pushing the fencing aside.
So weather didn't bother that in the contents? I mean, whether it was raining or hot or
because everything was
cold?
There'd be a big awning over the front, and then everything would be recessed back far enough from the street that it wouldn't be impacted. Monrovia Mutual Building and Loan was at 237. That building is no longer there. It became Brentwood Savings, then I believe it became Brent Mutual. Anyway, it became another savings and loan became a branch savings and loan operation, and then it was torn down and replaced by the parking lot for Citibank that's now on the same address on South Myrtle. Across the street at 238, right on the corner of Myrtle and Palm, it says it's vacant, but it had been the Vandy Camps. That was the one that had the probably hexagonal show windows on the corner and had a full-fledged windmill with the windmills themselves. I mean, it was, I don't know if it, I'm trying to remember if it moved or not. I think it might have. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it was stationary. Anyway, it looked like a windmill.
Was it a bakery or a restaurant?
It's a bakery. And I think they probably sold things that had been prepared in their location in Glendale. Although it was big enough, they might have done some of their preparation. Anyway, their stuff was fresh daily, or so they advertised. In fact, I think they even had a day-old section. But by this time, they'd moved further down the street. So we're at Palm and Myrtle. The southwest corner was Monrovia City Hall and the former Granite Bank building. On the southeast corner, Baker's Pharmacy. Next to it was Menge's Furniture Store. And then a series of smaller locations, Matthews Paint Company, McDougall's Studio. Mardell McDougall was a longtime Monrovia photographer. A women's clothing store, Moto Day, a jewelry store, and then at 316, the Monrovia Theater. This theater opened in 1920. It had kind of a checkered career later on with several openings and closings. But in 1950, it was a functioning theater, and probably about 1952, I went there to see one of the first 3D movies, Buona Devil, in 3D. And of course, everybody had to wear those crazy glasses. South of the theater was a barber shop, and then across the street, the Monrovia Public Library, the Carnegie Library. And then at 324, south of the barber shop, was Zarell and Wick's gas station. Zarell being Ben Zarell, Wicks being part of the Zarell family, Herman Zarell's son, John Zarell, and Louis Wicks. It was an open facility. It had gas pumps, a garage. They did repair work as well. And then at 334, right in the corner of Lime and Myrtle, was the Douglas and Bradford Mortuary. Later, Douglas and Zook, still in this location, but 1950s moved to its present location at 600 East Foothill. Southeast corner of Lime and Myrtle, Walker's Coffee Shop. Former, still there, now Basin 141. But at that point, that original space that had been built for the Monrovia Savings Bank in the 1920s had been divided into two, and Walker's Coffee Shop was right on the corner, and next to it was Edwards Shoe known to me later on as Brager's Shoe Store. I mentioned Vandy Camps. They were right across the street, southwest corner of Myrtle and Lime. There was the Balling Baby Shop, a takeoff on Balling Baby. It was run by Jerry Balling, whose last name was in fact Balling. So it was B-A-L-L instead of B-A-W-L, but anyway, a takeoff on Balling. A shoe store, the Parkway Shoe Repair, and at 404, the Economy Dress Shop. Western Auto was on the west side. Firestone was on the east side. Monrovia Travel Service, Greyhound Line Agency, and the Monrovia Typewriter Exchange was at 407 on the west side. Now the Myrtle Tree Cafe, that I understand is going to become a new what? Anyway, it's in the works. Stay tuned.
Steve, what is a typewriter exchange?
They did typewriter repair, and I think they also took in old typewriters in exchange for new ones.
Huh.
I know they did repair work.
Huh.
This was operated by the Bennett family. They were around for a long, long time, father and son. Post office, station number 1 was at Safety Drug Company, 408 South Myrtle. Safety Drug was another small storefront on Myrtle Avenue. In fact, the shelving went so high that I think I remember a ladder that they used to reach some of the upper shelves for when they had somebody who wanted something that wasn't an everyday use. Safety Drug, it was there until the Krikorian Theater went in, and I think maybe one on either side of it, became the lobby access area on Myrtle, so it was torn down. But it was one of many small drugstores in Monrovia. Across the street was a news dealer. The Monrovia Hardware Company was on the east side, and then on the west side was the Block's Clothier. Walter Block had a men's shop on Myrtle Avenue for many, many years, located in several different locations. My dad used to work for Walter Block. He laughingly referred to it as Block's Clothiers for men and boys, because yes, they had a boys section. They also handle local sales of Boy Scout uniforms and Boy Scout materials, equipment. I think I got my Cub Scout uniform there, bought my Boy Scout handbook there. Anyway, that was a local landmark for many years. A woman's clothing store, and then the Monrovia Stationery Company, and Walt J. Signs. Walt J., his full name was Walt Jaromsky. Walt painted a lot of signs. I think there might even be some still around that Walt did. He was behind the Myrtle Avenue frontage, but he had a very successful sign shop. Sporting goods store on the west side of the street, where Meringue Bakery is now, was Hunsaker's Specialty Shop. Upstairs was lived in by Lois Williams. That had an access from Myrtle Avenue. It was rooms upstairs were used for residential purposes.
What were the specialties sold in the specialty shop?
Mrs. E.B. Hunsaker. Corsets. Her specialty was corsets. By 1950, they weren't probably doing corsets, but she, at one point, sold corsets.
So this is the precursor to the Wizard of Bras?
Something like that, yeah. Back on the east side, we have Baines, a woman's clothing store, and 419, where the London Gastropub is now, is Custer's Prescription Pharmacy. Immediately south of that, 4 storefronts that had been grouped together by putting passageways between the individual stores. McBratney's Irish Linen Store, 421 to 427. Across on the east side of the street.
And by that time, it was a full-fledged department store.
Full-fledged department store, right. East side at 428, had Walton's Cafe, later known as Ed's Cafe. This was in the historic Kiefer building. It had a slightly tawdry reputation. It had my high level of interest. And as I attempted to go in one day to explore, my mother, by whom I was walking, reached forth and got me. So I could not investigate this low place that might corrupt my morals. A newsstand, and then finally on the corner was Cal's Barbershop, which was where my father got his first haircut and where I got my first haircut. And there was an old-fashioned shoe shine stand where you climbed up several steps, sat in the chair, and the shoe shine boy worked on your shoes for you. The barbershop still exists. It moved around the corner to East Lemon, but it was there for 50, 60, I'm guessing maybe 60 years in that location. Across the street, southwest corner of Lemon and Myrtle, J.C. Penney's, large, actually it was a basement storage area, main floor, and a mezzanine in the rear of the store. They had a central cache, which meant there were long wires running from the central cache upstairs in front down to maybe 6 or 8 different sales locations. So when you made your purchase, you handed the sales clerk your currency. The sales clerk took that and the sales slip that he or she had written up, put them in this cylinder, and then placed the cylinder in a device that was spring-loaded. And they would make sure it was securely fastened. They would pull the plunger down, turn loose, it would spring up, and it would shoot that cylinder up to the central cache. and you could hear it arrive with a thunk at the other end. The cashier would make the change, put the change back in the cylinder, spring-load it on her end, send it shooting down to the sales location where it would arrive with another thunk, which meant you knew your change was there. So can I still hear that sound? You bet. It was like the old downtown LA stores. Some of those had a pneumatic system, something like a drive-through teller situation now. You would put the cylinder containing the cash and the sales slip in the pneumatic system, close the door, the pneumatic would send it to a central cache somewhere in the building, and the later on it would arrive back with the change. But that was the economy of not having to have individual cash registers. You just had one cashier whose duty was to change or take in the sales and make change. 1954, that building caught fire in a spectacular evening fire, late afternoon, early evening. It damaged the building to the south slightly, but the building on the corner itself was gutted entirely. Don't know that the cause of the fire was ever identified. That evening, I was dragged by my mother to a concert at the Monrovia High School auditorium put on by the Community Concert Association. But at intermission, those of us who could get up to the balcony went to the outside stairway of the auditorium at Monrovia High School, looked due east, and could see the flames roiling up out of the burning building. It was pretty spectacular. Penny's moved from that location to a temporary location on East Colorado, while a new building was being built for them in the 300 block of South Myrtle. That building and the adjacent stores displaced Zarell and Wicks, and I believe by that time the mortuary had already moved to East Foothill, so that block was leveled. The Pennies moved there together with two, I believe, adjacent stores. And that was Pennies for a number of years until Pennies closed their Monrovia location in favor of one at the Santa Anita Mall. And the building went through several uses. It was recently redone as office space. Building is still there. They redid the front. And now the corner location is I think the Mediterranean Grill, Garden Grill. Anyway, and there was a flower shop on the corner for many years. That's now a restaurant. So Pennies migrated around. They did not rebuild at the same location for Pennies. They rebuilt the building, but Pennies moved to another location. Let's see, Buell's Shoes, now known as Crown Shoes. Buell's Shoes, successor to Jack's Quality Shoe Store, where Jack and Marion Zelkowitz started about, 1925, 1926? Betty?
28.
20, started their shoe store, sold Florsham shoes. Buell sold Florshams. Crown sells, I'm going to try this one 3 times. Crown sells Florshams. Also, store's been there for a long time. Next to it was P.J. LaFawn's men's clothing store. They sold clothing. They also did tailoring for men's. Across the street, next to the Pennies location, was Woolworths. That Woolworths I remember because as a youngster, first of all, it was not self-serve. There were sales clerks behind the counter. Secondly, it was a tall building. It had these interesting looking fixtures hanging from the ceiling. They had a white milk glass globe, and the very bottom of the milk glass globe was a tiny porthole. And I can remember standing there looking up and seeing a blue flame. They were gas lights. They were the backup system for when that building was constructed, probably about 1910, 8, 9, 10, in that range, when electricity was still not 100% reliable, so they had the gas lights as backup.
And they were still functioning in 1950.
They were still functioning, and the pilot lights were still burning in 1950.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's there now in that building?
What was there?
And is it
Divided up, well, let's see, what was in there? Well, the Children's Hospital outlet was there. I think that's closed. The Bella Sarah, no, not Bella. What's the other Bella? The women's place, Bellissima Salon, was where Woolworths moved after Pennies burned. They rebuilt the building, and Woolworths moved next door into the larger location that had a lunch counter. Men's shop also on the west side, and no, pardon me, on the east side. Whoops, skip Monrovia Bakery. Monrovia Bakery started out on East Olive Avenue, and then when that building in the 500 block was completed about 1911 or 12, they moved there, and the bakery was in existence until, what, 5-6 years ago? Operated by a number of different families, operated by the Muellers for 40-some years until they decided it's retirement time. They were succeeded briefly by 2 bakeries, one specialized in donuts, and I think there's a boba place there now. Anyway, a lot of people were very disappointed when the Monrovia Bakery closed because they had lots of really great specialty items. They had, well, they did gingerbread houses, they did fruitcake, they did Pfeffernusse, they did Springerly. Anyway, lots of specialty stuff that you can't find anyplace else. Peanut brittle. Oh man, they're peanut brittle. Special recipe. Christmas time. Pecan pies, some of the best pecan pies. All family recipes. Ah, alas. What's that great line from Aesop's Fables? Ah, what memories cling around the instruments of our pleasure. Said by the little old lady, she picked up a wine jug. Okay, next to the Monrovia Bakery, a men's shop, Johnson Music Company. They had out in front the RCA Victor dog. It used to appear on the RCA Victor label with the caption, "His Master's Voice." Well, I didn't realize it as a youngster, but they had a loudspeaker. No, they had a speaker. Anyway, in the dog. And as I went walking by one fine day, somebody inside saw me and thought, I'm going to give this kid a scare. So they spoke through the dog, through the speaker, scared me. Anyway, that was there for Johnson Music Company for many, many years. Which of the many brothers? Don Collins had a record store there that closed only recently in that location. Across the street, W.G. Barks, optometrist. Dr. Barks came to Monrovia in 1907 and was in that location until his retirement. At one point, he was in partnership or shared space with, what jewelry store? Box Jewelers. And at one point, I've been told, in fact, I think I've seen a picture, the clock, the street clock, that was once, that is now in front of the former Box Jewelers, was in front of Dr. Barks on the west side of Myrtle rather than the east. Flower shop next to Dr. Barks. Boy Scouts of America, the Monrovia Sportsman's Club, and the Santa Anita Sportsman's Club all occupied the rooms that were upstairs on the second floor of that building. Decker Jewelers at 512. Box Jewelers, at, as I mentioned, at 50. Did I get the boxes?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay, so Decker was surprise to me. Decker's was in several different locations. But in 1950, Decker's was at 512, which would have been north of the alley between Lemon and Colorado. On the west side was Arts Yardage, took up 2 storefronts. There were 3 storefronts in that building. Bassinger's Flower Shop was in the first, and then Arts Yardage took the middle and the location immediately adjacent to the alley between Lemon and Colorado. Arts Yardage had bolts of cloth. You could go in there and say, okay, I want X number of yards, and they had a little meter attached to the counter. And you would take have you seen one of these?
Yes.
Yeah. I was amazed. I'd stand there and watch and they'd run it through and it would register.
Mm-hmm.
So you could then know when you'd reached the quantity you wanted, then you'd cut it off. Actually, probably cut the edge and then rip it off the rest of the way. Yeah, so Arts had that. Monrovia Bootery was also on the east side next to Decker's, and then Sherwin-Williams Company, right at the alleyway, paint store. Sherwin-Williams actually still exists as a Monrovia store, but they're now on West Huntington rather than on South Myrtle. 517 was the thrift outlet variety store. You asked me about that one because that's now where Donna Baker has her real estate office. A couple of years later, it was, I think, a little 5 and dime store.
Wasn't it a cafe in 1947?
It was a cafe. I mean, many different things, many different stores in that operation. Now we get to boxes at 518, immediately south of the alleyway between Lemon and Colorado. The Monrovia Shoe Mart south of boxes. And then my personal favorite, Lou's Malt Shop. They had, at least when we first came to Monrovia, they had an ice cream machine in the very front of the store. So when you entered off of Myrtle Avenue, there was a little hallway that went by, and then it opened up once you got by the little enclosure where the ice cream maker was. Great big cylinder, stainless steel, and that's where they made their ice cream. So you could watch it being made, and then you could go back and order ice cream or a malt in the area to the back. Kirby's shoe store across the street, south of the thrift outlet. Kirby's, and then also next to that was Anderson's Stationery Shop. That was run by Hannah Anderson, a friend of my grandmother's from the Business and Professional Women's Club. Later on, it was taken over by Sims when Hannah sold it, and then for many years it was Heritage House Stationery. They expanded to take in the former shoe store location. Then it became a pet store, and what is it now? I'm drawing a blank. Good question. Got to go down and check it out. Upstairs, the Myrtle rooms, again, furnished rooms where you would rent a room and no cooking facilities. You'd have all your meals on Myrtle Avenue. Valley Hardware. Valley Hardware was, first of all, next to Myrtle Rooms in the former American National Bank building. That building was redone and Valley moved down the street and was there for a number of years. Finally, it went fast out of business. Pardon me. And that's a problem because Valley was one of those locations where you could find all kinds of variety of things. Sal was a longtime employee. You'd come in with a minute screw and I'd say to Sal, do you have this in stock? You'd get one. Not your Home Depot. I mean, they had a little bit of everything and you could match almost anything you needed. 524, which would on the east side, it was Moran and Maloney Draperies. I'm trying to think of another drapery company. Was it Moran? Huh. Anyway. Then the Bank of America building. By this time it was in fact known as the Bank of America building. Bank of America was on the ground floor right at the corner, and there were a number of offices upstairs. Let's see what else we got. Monrovia Board of Realtors, Best Disposal, Dr. Holman, dentist, Draper and Porter Lawyers, Homer Bell, former city attorney lawyer, Patton and Duke, later Patton, Faith, and Sanford, had their offices up there. Monrovia Camera and Gift Shop was at 528. I mentioned the Bank of America right at the corner, and then the Central Building. Now in 1950, the Central Building was a 3-story tall building. But not for long. Let's see who was there. Voodoo Credit Bureau, Harry Booth, accountant. Anyway, the story I got was this. The owner of the building was having a problem renting the building because it had no elevator and it was 3 stories tall. He got an estimate on installing an elevator and he got an estimate on removing the top 2 floors of the building. It was cheaper to take off the top 2 floors than it was to install an elevator, so that's what he did. So the building is there as a single-story building, built by W.H. Evans in 1909 as a 3-story building. The cigar store, the small cigar store, is located in the former stairwell for the building. I poked my head in when they were getting it ready for occupancy, and I explained that they were in the former stairwell. Later on I went by, and they said, you know, sure enough, we took up some of the flooring and then found where the stairway was leading to the basement. Anyway, the building, probably 1951, 1952, in that range, was abbreviated and made a single-story building. Security First National Bank, Joseph Sartori's bank, right at the corner where the Monrovian Family Restaurant is now. Network, Colorado, southwest corner of Myrtle in Colorado, is Gilbert's 5, 10, and 25-cent store. I guess it would be the equivalent of the 99-cent store of today. Anyway, it was just that. It was a department store, something like Woolworth's or Coronet. That location is going to become the Liberace Cafe. It's in process now. In fact, if you go by and look in the window, they've got a costume. I don't know if it's got rhinestones. It's got something on it that sets it apart. And that's the plan. I don't know what their opening date is, but they will be in what was T. Phillips Ale House, now will be Liberace Cafe. East side of the street, 3 realtors in the corner location, a barber shop, and the Western Union Telegraph store immediately next to that, and Boucher's Sewing Machine Shop. Those 3 locations are now Rudy's Mexican Restaurant. Rudy took over first the corner, maybe the first 2 locations, and then expanded into the 3rd. So 602, 4, and 6 are now part of Rudy's Mexican Food. The Monrovia Floral Company and the Monrovia National Paint Store were at 608 and 610. 608 was where Baker's Pharmacy started in 1909 and then later moved to the location up the street at 302. Those 2 storefronts, 608 and 610, are now the Copper Still Grill. They took out the partition between the storefronts. It's now one large location. 612 was McMahon's Furniture Store. That later moved to the 300 block, 2 or 300 block. Anyway, West Huntington Drive. That closed down and then it became the 3-day suit store. That building was leveled and now there's a Starbucks on the location. So if you do the Starbucks drive-through at Magnolia and Huntington, that was this former site of McMahon's when they moved from Myrtle Avenue. 616 was Matt's Liquor Store. And across the street, let's start with the odd numbers, Fitzsimmons Market. Earlier than that, it was Gertmanian's. Gertmanian being Seb Gertmanian of Pasadena, had a branch location in Monrovia. There was a separate bakery area in the front of it. I can remember going shopping there for jelly donuts. Jelly donuts. They weren't the typical jelly donuts. They were able to bake the donut in such a way that there was a depressed area about the size of a quarter in the top. And then they would take a dollop of jelly and place that in the depression. So what you saw was this wonderful oval, or wonderful circle of jelly surrounded by the glazed donut. Good stuff. Also in there was Kettner's. Kenneth of Ken and Viola Kettner had the meat department in Fitzsimmons and then later on moved to West Huntington Drive. And at this time, there he was in there. The Fitzsimmons itself, they probably handled the fruit, vegetables, and staples. And I think the bakery, there's not a separate listing, so by that time the bakery operation may have been phased out. That location then became later on Santa Anita Family Service many years later. What else on that side? That's it. South of the alley at 617, Happy's Liquor Store. We deliver happily. Operated by the Mendel family, several generations of the Mendel family, who had another location in Sierra Madre. Both locations now no longer liquor store. Happy's is now the Trilco Antiques. Story Furniture on the east side at 618. 620, now the home of the Monrovia Chamber of Commerce, was Fred Ainley, real estate, an accountant and a drafting service. South of that was a food market, Jack's Food Market, and a separate meat store. And that was the former Slick's Groceteria, another open-air market.
Steve, the building that the Chamber of Commerce is in
Yes.
seems old, is it?
It is. It's early 1900s. The facade has been done a couple times, but the building itself, it dates back that far. Let's see, what else on that side? Did I mention Story Furniture? Yeah, so on the south of the alley, it would have been Matt's Liquors, Story Furniture, and Ainley's. Then Jack's Food Market, which was originally the Slick Brothers Groceteria, Fred's Lunch, and then right at the corner was the War Surplus Store. That had been Neville's Drugstore. Then it became an Owl Rexall store. And then I guess the next step would have been the surplus store, the War Surplus Store. Anyway, there's a taco place there now, right on the corner.
How long was the surplus store in business?
Good question. By the 60s, I think there was a donut shop in there.
I remember it.
This is further up the street.
Oh,
Yeah, a little further up the street.
Oh.
That space was taken over by Jake's Roadhouse. When they expanded,
Okay.
I think they took over that surplus store place.
oh, okay. Does it different business or it was moved?
I think it was different. I think there was some interim stores in OK. On the west side, let me see, we have a custom saddlery at 619, now the home of Monrovia Pond, or neighborhood pond, anyway. White's Grill, a restaurant. Bunker's Hardware. In a building that was built in 1904 for a hardware store. Opened originally by one of the members of the Nye family, Annette Nye's son. It was a long, narrow store with shelving on either side. The owner, I think, was the only one who knew where everything was. But you could go in there in the 1950s and ask for if he had in stock the burner for a kerosene lamp. He did. There was an area in back where the store widened a little bit, which I think was probably an old gent's hangout because there was an old wood-burning stove, pot-bellied stove back there that had been converted to gas, and some chairs where you could sit around and talk. So that was there until, I'm thinking 1960s. There a long, long time. It started out as a plumbing supply place, Kasner's. Probably Kasner may have bought from the Nye family. California Furniture Company, right next to the corner, and then right in the corner where J.B. Burger is, was a two-story brick building. It had, again, rooms on the upstairs for rent and real estate offices on the south. You know, and I said 628. was on the corner, and I'm mistaken. It was the next to the corner, and right on the corner was still a drug company. This time it was Pruess, P-R-U-E-S-S, and that was probably, let's see if they tell,
What's the cross street?
it's right at Olive.
Olive.
Yeah, it was still a Rexall store in 1950. They featured Rexall products even though it was under private ownership.
So were there train stations?
Right there,
Right,
right there,
ticket-
the tracks were still there in Olive, and the Pacific Electric was still running on a regular basis.
And so is that where the ticket office was, or is that on a different?
Ticket office was originally on the corner, I think before the building where the drugstore and the war surplus store was built. And then in 1907, I think they built the depot, permanent depot on the south side. Because it lists, we started in the 700 block.
This is where the Paragon is.
Yeah, and there's, at 702 was the Southern Pacific and the Pacific Electric. The Blue Line Taxi at 710, the Monrovia Tire Shop at 714. And then on the west side was the Gem City Transfer and Storage Company, the Monrovia Cafe, Hall Furniture Company, I remember that business from later. There was a mobile station, the Blue Seal Linen Supply, and then at Myrtle and Walnut was the Monrovia Laundry. And there are pictures of that with their laundry. Early, I think the Legacy Project's got some real early pictures of the laundry.
Oh, Monrovia Steam Laundry?
Yeah.
Wow.
When it was up the street, before it moved to
okay.
this location. If not, I'll try to find some that gets in there, because there's this great picture of the drivers with their delivery trucks and pickup trucks lined up in a row out in front, and then all the workers lined up in front of the building. It's a great picture.
And speaking of pictures in the Legacy Project, Gem City Transfer, we have a picture of a wagon in like the 1890s or something. So that was,
might be the same business, different location.
that's what I'm wondering.
But same existence, right.
60 years later.
60 years later, right. So that takes care of the 700 block up to Walnut. Anything of interest there? Well, at 815 was Smith's Welding and Blacksmith Shop.
Mm.
And that's the building that was just recently torn down to make way for the new development. Had the old press middle front, and that particular building was started by Monrovia's first blacksmith. And give me 5 minutes and I'll think of his name. Anyway, the building was built by him in 1906, and by 1950 was owned by Herb Smith, who operated it for many years and then sold it later on, I think, to the gentleman. I think he told me when I talked to him, I think he told me he bought directly from Herb Smith. And he had the property on the frontage on Myrtle, and then the L-shaped parcel behind it. And so he sold it to be part of the development that's going in now. And then there was a lumber company, Pat and Blinn Lumber Company, also in South Myrtle.
So that takes us to,
That takes us to Chestnut. The corner is showing as vacant, the corner where the Scotia Hotel was. And then later on, Edison, about 1917, Southern California, Edison put up the building that's there now, the brick building, that's now houses, I believe, a firm of architects. And that was not included in the present development, but starting south of that building and their parking lot is the development that's going in now that goes then down the way to Chestnut.
so that architect's building is the same building that was Southern California Edison's?
Yeah,
Mm.
I think built by Edison.
Mm.
And that was probably built after, when they moved from their location on East Olive, where you've got the picture of the truck. Yeah, because Ed, there was
Which
an
is
office.
now the floral shop on East Olive?
Yeah, roughly there. Yeah, Monrovia Floral. I have to look at the early directory to be sure, but they probably had their sales location or their business office on Myrtle, and then behind their utility area where they had their wagons to go out and inspect lines and repair lines. Okay, at Chestnut, let's see if it shows. No, by 1950, it looks like the former Southern Pacific Depot had been torn down. 900 block was B.M. Hubble Fruits. They packed, I think, dates and other things like that. Walker Potteries. I think that was one of several pottery locations. Wait a second. I have here Arthur Jones Radio Repair, and I know that in that Southern Pacific Depot was a radio repair shop, so I believe the building, the Southern Pacific Depot former, was still there, and Arthur Jones was living there and conducting his radio repair business there.
In the depot?
In the former Southern Pacific Depot.
Oh, in the Southern
Yeah.
Pacific, not the Santa Fe.
No, it was a two-story wooden building, typical design for that era. Let's see, anything else of interest? Mostly industrial type stuff. Union Oil Station, Standard Oil Station, used cars, motors. Huntington Drive at 1111, Easy Trailer Hitch, still there.
Hmm.
Yeah. 1127. A building I remember is the Church of the Latter Rain. Cypress, not too much there. San Gabriel Valley Market, and there may still be a market there. It's on the east side of Myrtle, south of Huntington. I'd have to go by and take a look. So that's 10 or 11 blocks of Myrtle Avenue, as it was in 1950, reflecting the backbone of the business community when Myrtle Avenue was definitely the focal point. Stores, I believe, if not in 1950, or shortly thereafter, open until 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock Friday nights. So people who worked and couldn't get away during the day to shop could do their shopping. I think it was 8 o'clock. Parking was an issue. There was no off-street parking. That was to come along a couple years later. Offices on the second floor of the building that were multi-story. Still, I mentioned the rooming houses. Those were not atypical. And of course, around on Colorado was the Central House, rented rooms. West Colorado, the Davenport, rented rooms. So a lot of people, single people normally, who maybe worked as clerks or salespeople in the businesses along Myrtle Avenue would rent a room adjacent to Myrtle Avenue or on Myrtle Avenue and take their meals in the many restaurants that were on Myrtle Avenue. Largely little mom and pop operations where they'd feel, you could go in and for 75 cents get a good meal. Let's see, there was that picture that Myron had in his collection of a place on East Colorado, and it said, what was it? It was something and something, 25 cents. And Myron's comment was, yesterday.
That was about 1890.
Yeah, exactly, about 1890. So in turn, I can read this thing and say, yesterday, because I can remember so many of these locations. And they were the operation of small business people rather than chain stores. I mean, yes, there were some chain stores, but mostly it was small, independent business people who operated these stores, and Myrtle Avenue was the economic backbone of the community and generated probably most of the revenue. And then the pattern began of further development of Huntington, decline in business as Duarte developed its own shopping area, as the Sanity, the mall, opened up and drew business, and as absentee landlords became less and less interested in keeping their property up. So the physical appearance was not inviting, and the decline began.